Hi, I'm the son they left behind. The day my father died, I didn't just lose him. I lost everything. My wife filed for divorce before the body was even cold, to marry my own brother. They called me a failure, said I was weak, said I had nothing. What they didn't know was that my father left everything to me, every dollar, every share, every secret. Now, they're about to find out exactly what he built and why he gave it all to the useless son. I remember the phone call more through the weight it left in my chest than the words themselves. The hospital had been trying to reach me since dawn, and when I finally picked up, the voice on the other end was soft, steady. The kind people use when they know they are about to break something inside you. My father was gone. They said it with care, but there is no gentle way to hear it. I sat there for a long moment, the morning light sliding across my kitchen counter while the world stayed strangely still. I didn't bother finishing the coffee I had poured. I just grabbed my jacket and the old pocket watch my father had given me when I was a boy. He used to tell me the ticking would steady my nerves when life felt too loud. As I drove toward the estate, the sound of it in my palm felt uneven, like it wasn't keeping time the way it used to. Maybe I was the one out of rhythm. The sky over Charleston was dim, a thin layer of mist hanging low over the marshes, as if the whole city was holding its breath. The house came into view the way storm clouds do, slow and heavy. I pulled into the long gravel drive and walked toward the front door, trying to breathe through the tightness in my throat. Inside, the place was packed with relatives, but the room barely shifted when I entered. A few nodded, some didn't. It felt like walking into someone else's home. I tried to remind myself this was where I grew up, where my father taught me how to fix a fence and how to keep my word. Yet now it felt like I'd stepped into a place where my name meant nothing. Corbin stood in the center of the room, speaking with the confidence of a man convinced the world belonged to him. He barely glanced in my direction. Marla stood near him, too composed for someone who had just lost her father-in-law. Her hands were folded neatly, her posture straight, her eyes dry. That cold steadiness in her expression told me something I wasn't ready to understand. Before I could ask anyone what had happened in my absence, Marla walked toward me. She didn't offer a hug or even a touch on the arm. She simply said she needed a word. I followed her into a quieter corner of the hallway. She looked at me the way people look at a stranger on the street, and then she told me she wanted a divorce. No hesitation, no tremble in her voice. She spoke as if this conversation had been rehearsed, as if she had been waiting for the moment my father died to finally say it. "You're not going anywhere in life, Alden," she said. "You don't carry your weight. You never matched the bracket name." I could feel the heat rise in my face, but the rest of me felt strangely hollow. I asked her why she would pick today, of all days. She shrugged like it was nothing. "Grief kills weak marriages first," she said. Every word felt like it had been polished ahead of time, shaped to cut. When I looked back toward the living room, Corbin was watching us. He wasn't pretending not to. He stood there with a sort of calm that made my stomach twist. When he stepped closer and placed his hand on Marla's back, I felt the floor dip beneath me. Marla didn't flinch. Instead, she looked me straight in the eye and said she had found a real man. Someone decisive. Someone who wasn't afraid to lead. The pieces slid together without effort. The long glances between them over the past year. The private conversations they brushed off as harmless. The faint whispers from cousins I once trusted. Corbin spoke then. his voice steady. "Everyone knew this would happen eventually," he said. "You've always been the one drifting along." I waited for someone in the room to speak up. Anyone. But all I heard was my aunt whispering to another relative, "He's always been the quiet one." As if that explained why this betrayal made sense. As if my silence somehow invited it. Corbin told me I should step aside so the family could handle real responsibilities. Marla didn't look at me again. She stood angled toward him, already choosing her side. I tried to find my voice. I reminded them I was the one who took Dad to his appointments, the one who stayed with him in the hospital during those long nights. I said it plainly, hoping someone would remember. But the words hung in the air without landing anywhere. No one cared. Not enough to say it out loud, at least. The room felt smaller with every breath I took. I stepped outside and let the cold air hit me. The mist had thickened, brushing against my face, as if the weather itself was trying to steady me. I closed my hand around the pocket watch until my knuckles hurt. The ticking inside seemed slower, or maybe my pulse was drowning it out. I couldn't tell. All I knew was that something in me cracked. Grief pressed under betrayal, betrayal pressed under disbelief. I stood on the porch trying to collect myself, trying not to collapse under the weight of everything that had been taken from me in a single morning. The door creaked open behind me, and someone said there was something else I needed to know. I turned, expecting another blow, emotional or otherwise. But it was my Aunt Loretta, her small frame almost blending into the doorframe. Her eyes were soft but uneasy, and her voice barely carried over the wind. "Alden," she said, "come with me a moment. There's something you ought to know." She motioned me toward the back of the house. I followed her through the wide hallway into a side sitting room no one used anymore. It was quiet there, lined with books my father never had time to read, and smelled faintly of old wood polish and something faintly floral, maybe lavender. She closed the door behind us, her hand trembling against the handle. Loretta was one of the only people in the family who never treated me like a ghost at the dinner table. She'd always called me thoughtful instead of soft, steady instead of slow. Now she looked like she was about to unravel. "I didn't want to say anything," she began, brushing her hair back nervously. "But I think you deserve to hear it before they twist it any further." She hesitated, her fingers fiddling with the edge of a tissue pulled from her sleeve. That pause. It said everything. Something had happened. Something worse than Marla's ice-cold divorce or Corbin's smug expression. I braced myself, a strange pressure gathering behind my ribs, like my body already knew the next words would split something open. "This morning," she said slowly, "I overheard Corbin talking with Marla, before anyone had even mentioned your father's will." I blinked. What were they saying? They weren't grieving Alden. They were planning, talking about how things would be handled, about what they had secured. That's the word he used, secured. Her voice tightened on the last syllable, like it had left a bitter taste in her mouth. "They already knew the contents of the will?" I asked. "They sure acted like they did," she said. "They sounded confident. Too confident." Something in my chest coiled. Corbin had always been ambitious, but ambition doesn't usually come with this kind of choreography, unless he was playing a long game. Loretta stepped closer, lowering her voice. 3 days ago, I saw Corbin meeting privately with Mr. Lyman, your father's estate attorney." "Lyman?" My voice came out sharper than I intended. "He's been our lawyer for decades." She nodded. "At the time, I didn't think much of it. But now, between that meeting and what I overheard this morning, I think they're manipulating something, Alden. I think it's been in motion longer than you know. I sank into one of the old armchairs by the window, the upholstery stiff under me. My thoughts churned. Marla's departure wasn't just personal, it was strategic. And Corbin wasn't just swooping in out of convenience, he was calculating every move. For a moment, I let the silence of the room surround me. And then, out of nowhere, a memory flickered. My father, one Thanksgiving years ago, had pulled me aside as the family argued over politics at the dinner table. He'd leaned in and whispered, "When the wind shifts, watch who moves first." Back then, I thought he was talking about the stock market. Now the words hit differently. The wind had shifted, all right, and Corbin had moved first, dragging Marla with him like a trophy. Loretta's voice pulled me back. "You should also know, the rest of the family thinks Corbin should take the lead now. They say he's got presence, that he understands the family name." I swallowed, the words stinging more than I wanted to admit. "And what do they say about me?" I asked. Her eyes dropped to the floor. "They think you're sentimental, quiet. You always kept to yourself, and they took that for weakness. They think you'll just let it happen." Her words weren't meant to hurt, but they landed with precision. "The invisible bracket," I said bitterly. "That's what they've always seen." From the hallway beyond the closed door, I heard a soft burst of laughter, Marla's voice, followed by Corbin's deeper tone. I didn't catch the words, but the sound alone was enough to spark something sharp inside me. The humiliation was no longer just mine. It was public, echoed through that house like gossip passed around at a wake. Loretta leaned down and squeezed my arm gently. "They think you'll just accept it," she said. That line, it stuck. It landed deep. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true. They thought I'd just keep my head down, nod politely, and disappear. Like always. But something shifted inside me. I straightened. "When's the will reading?" "Tomorrow morning," she said, voice lower now. "But," she hesitated, "they're planning to announce their engagement tonight. Tonight, Alden. The day your father died." I blinked at her. "Engagement?" She nodded, pain written all over her face. "They want to lock this in before the will's even opened. It's like they want to crush you ahead of time." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I didn't even know what emotion sat in my chest. Was it shock, anger, sadness? Maybe all of it, wrapped into something cold and precise. "I can't let them do that," I said, more to myself than her. Loretta gave a small, sad nod, then stepped back as I stood. Outside the sitting room, the air had shifted. The hallway was too quiet. And then I heard it. Corbin's voice, loud and clear, clinking a glass against another, calling the family to gather in the main hall. He sounded triumphant, as if this were already over. I reached into my coat and felt for the old pocket watch. The ticking filled my ears, louder than the room around me. For the first time all day, it felt steady again. I stepped into the hallway, ready to hear whatever cruelty they had prepared next. The low hum of conversation buzzed behind the dining room doors, blending with the faint clink of glassware and silver. From where I stood, I could already feel the chill, not from the air, but from what was coming. The dining hall looked more like a theater set than a place of mourning. Crystal chandeliers poured warm light over the long mahogany table, but it only made the room feel colder, as if trying too hard to appear dignified. Around the table sat most of my extended family, dressed in subdued tones but laughing too easily, sipping wine too quickly, as if my father hadn't died just hours earlier. I stood near the back, just inside the threshold, unnoticed, same as always. Corbin stood at the head of the table, well, almost. He didn't dare sit in Dad's chair, but someone had placed it there anyway. Empty. A silent gesture, maybe intended to honor him. But no one even glanced at it. They sat around it like it was any other seat, too eager to fill the power vacuum to treat it with reverence. My father's presence was a shadow in that room, unwanted and inconvenient. Corbin tapped his spoon against a wine glass. "Family," he said with a wide grin, the kind that belonged at a wedding toast, not a wake. "I won't keep you long, just a quick word from the heart." I watched Marla from across the room. She leaned slightly toward him, her eyes fixed on his face like he was reciting poetry. I could already feel what was coming. Corbin cleared his throat dramatically. "We've decided not to hide our happiness any longer. Life is short. Dad would have wanted us to live boldly, love fully." I nearly choked. "So Marla and I are engaged." Silence hit first, then scattered applause, a few forced cheers. An uncle muttered, "Well, I guess good for them." And someone else gave a too loud chuckle. The walls around me seemed to tilt. I stared at the table, the glass in Corbin's hand catching the light like a blade. No one looked at me. Their eyes slid away, like I wasn't even in the room. I stood there, frozen. My lungs felt tight. The grief I was still barely holding in turned sour, twisting with shame, with the public nature of it all. It was like watching them carve my place out of the family with a smile on their faces. My hands clenched by my sides. Then came the next cut. "To the new era of the Brackett legacy," Corbin said, raising his glass higher, "led by those strong enough to protect it." To everyone else, it sounded like another line in a speech. To me, it was a knife. A folded paper was placed on the table. Someone slid it over like it was nothing. A seating chart. I stepped closer, curiosity giving way to dread. I scanned the page until I found my name. Not under family. Not beside any cousins or uncles. Logistics assistant. Placed near the kitchen doors. I stared at those two words. Not son. Not brother. Just staff, a helper, an errand boy, a cousin, one who'd never liked me, chuckled loud enough for the table to hear. "Guess Alden's right where he belongs, huh?" Laughter rippled across the room. I didn't look up. My hand moved on its own, reaching for the paper, just to feel it, just to make sure it was real. I read it again. Logistics assistant. Like I was an intern at my own father's funeral. That's when it hit me. Not just the embarrassment, but the certainty. This had been in motion for a while. Coordinated. Cold. A flash of memory struck me out of nowhere. Dad and me, on a lake when I was 12, fishing in the still morning water. He'd handed me a sandwich wrapped in wax paper and said, "One day they'll wish they treated you better." Back then, I thought he meant my older cousins who left me out of games. Now I knew better. I took a slow breath. Marla walked past me on her way to the powder room. She didn't stop, just brushed close enough to be heard and whispered, "Don't make tonight awkward. Let people who matter enjoy themselves." I turned my head just slightly, enough to catch her smirk as she disappeared into the hall. That was the moment something snapped, not in anger, but in clarity. I reached into my coat and took out my father's pocket watch. The ticking was louder than before, steady like a pulse, like a metronome guiding a symphony I was finally ready to conduct. I looked around the room. They were laughing, toasting, pretending, but for the first time, I didn't see them as my family. I saw them as players in a rigged game, one I had been losing by playing fair. I wasn't going to stand in the shadows anymore, waiting for permission to belong. Corbin launched into a speech about bracket leadership and vision for the future. I didn't hear half of it. Instead, I turned and walked quietly toward the hallway. Not to escape, but to breathe. And plan. The walls seemed to close in tighter the farther I moved from the dining hall. I passed the portraits of ancestors I barely remembered, the scent of polished wood and old cologne still clinging to the air. I heard faint laughter behind me, Corbin's voice rising in that familiar, smug pitch. But I kept moving, past the coat stand, past the dusty window that overlooked the side garden, until I reached the dim corridor near the back of the house. I turned, expecting more humiliation. Maybe another cousin with a half-hearted joke, or Marla chasing me down with some final insult. But instead, I found Ellis. He stepped out from the shadowed doorway near the stairwell. His eyes darted to mine, then quickly over my shoulder. "We don't have long," he whispered. I blinked. "Ellis, come with me." He tugged my sleeve gently, pulling me farther into the corridor, behind the old folding screen where the wall met the pantry door. It was quiet there, private, almost forgotten. He looked thinner than I remembered, his shirt hanging looser at the collar, hair disheveled like he'd been tugging at it all evening. His hands trembled slightly as he shut the pantry door behind us. "I can't stand this anymore," he said. "The pretending. The way they're all smiling like this is some big celebration." My mouth opened, but I didn't know what to say. Ellis had always been the observer, rarely speaking up, never getting involved. His voice tonight, though low, carried an edge I hadn't heard before. "I know I'm not brave," he continued, "but I'm not blind either. They've treated you like the expendable bracket for years. And it's not because you're weak, it's because you never fought back. You made it easy for them." The words didn't sting the way I expected. They hit lower, deeper, like he wasn't trying to hurt me, just show me something I hadn't dared admit. I stared past him, through the narrow hallway window. From this angle, I could still see the long dining table. My father's chair stood empty at the head, its back tall and straight, like a silent sentinel. No one looked at it. No one paused. They gathered around it like it was just another piece of furniture. That image burned into me, an anchor. My father's presence erased, just like mine. Ellis shifted uncomfortably. "There's more. You need to know something. Corbin's been laying the groundwork for weeks." I turned to him, eyebrows narrowing. "What do you mean?" "He's been telling the rest of the family that your father asked him, personally, to take over the estate. That he said you weren't fit. Too emotional. No direction." My stomach twisted. "I never heard those words from your dad," Ellis said quickly. "Only from Corbin. And I overheard him saying them long before your father passed." It felt like the floor dipped beneath me. My knees held, but barely. "He's rewriting, Dad," I murmured. Ellis nodded. "And everyone else is buying it, or pretending to. He's got that way of making people feel like they don't want to be on the wrong side of him." I thought of the seating chart, of being labeled logistics assistant, of the look in Marla's eyes when she said I was useless. None of it was spontaneous. This wasn't grief unraveling people. This was a campaign, planned, calculated, cruel. I looked at Ellis, truly seeing him for the first time. His jaw was tight, his hands still trembling, but his eyes were tired of pretending. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. He hesitated, then reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope. The paper was aged but intact, the seal unbroken. He held it out like it was hot in his hands. "I found this in your dad's study, before anyone else got here. I didn't know what to do with it, but now I think it's meant for you." I took it, fingers brushing the familiar curve of my father's handwriting, my name written in black ink across the front. A chill ran down my arms. "I'm not afraid of what he wrote," I said softly. "I'm afraid he really did lose faith in me." Ellis didn't speak, just stood there, watching me. The envelope felt heavier than anything I'd held all day. Not physically, but with meaning, with risk, with the possibility that everything I feared about myself might be confirmed. Through the wall, laughter rose again, closer now. Maybe someone had moved toward the kitchen. Maybe Corbin was coming. Ellis leaned in. "There's something else. I don't know exactly what, but Corbin's planning another announcement tonight. Something about shifting authority before the will reading." My eyes snapped to his. "He's moving fast," Ellis added. "Don't leave. No matter what happens next, stay here." And with that, he turned and slipped away, vanishing into the darker end of the hallway. I stood there alone, envelope still in hand. My heart thudded louder than the voices behind the wall. My father's truth was inside this. Corbin's lies were closing in from every side, and somewhere between them was the version of myself I needed to become. I slid my thumb beneath the seal, but before I could open it, someone shouted my name from across the hall. I closed my hand around the envelope on instinct and turned toward the voice, bracing myself for another attack. I expected Corbin, maybe Marla, someone ready to twist the knife a little deeper. It wasn't either of them. It was my mother. She was moving fast, almost stumbling over the edge of the rug as she reached me. Her breath came in short bursts, and her eyes looked wild in a way I hadn't seen since I was a child. Before I could ask anything, she grabbed my wrist and pulled me toward the staircase. "Alden, not here," she whispered. "Please." Her fingers tightened, urging me up the steps, away from the crowd, away from the dining hall and its false celebration. I followed her up to the second floor, the envelope still clutched in my palm. When we reached the landing outside my father's study, she stopped and glanced both ways as if someone might be listening. "Mom, what's going on?" I asked. She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady herself. "You don't understand how close things are to falling apart tonight." The hall light flickered slightly, making her face appear even paler. For a moment, I wondered if she was going to faint. Instead, she leaned closer and spoke in a shaky whisper. "Corbin is pushing for a family vote tonight, a symbolic transition. He wants everyone to agree he should take over before the will reading tomorrow. He wants to make it look inevitable." I blinked at her, disbelief mixing with exhaustion. "Tonight? After everything?" "Yes," she said, voice cracking. "And he's using every bit of momentum he created downstairs. The engagement, the attention, the way the family's siding with him. He wants to break you before morning." I stared at her, unable to find a solid thought in the mess of emotions swirling inside me. "Why are you telling me this now?" Her jaw tightened, and she reached for my arm again. "Because confronting him won't help you. It will only make you look unstable. Don't give him more ammunition." Her words wrapped around me like ropes, pulling tight until I felt trapped. Everywhere I turned, someone was trying to direct me, silence me, shape my reactions. Corbin with his lies, Marla with her cruelty. And now even my mother, though her intentions felt different, was urging me to stand down. A hollow space opened inside me. "Mom," I said softly, "you're asking me to just let him walk over everything Dad built." She squeezed her eyes shut. "I'm asking you not to get hurt, even worse." The statement hit harder than I expected, not because of the concern, but because of the tone, heavy with pity. It felt like a quiet confirmation that even she didn't believe I could stand on equal ground with my brother. She looked at the carpet as she continued. "Your father wanted peace between you boys. He hid your struggles to protect you from the family's criticism. But that made them assume you were unreliable, soft, someone your father needed to shelter." I swallowed hard. Her words were gentle, but they landed like blows. "So they thought I couldn't handle anything," I said, voice thin. She didn't deny it. She just looked away. My heart pulled tight in my chest. Finally, she whispered, "Corbin told them that your father had concerns, that those concerns might show up in the will. He implied you were financially irresponsible, that you drained your father with failed projects." "That's a lie," I said, louder than I meant to. The anger rose fast, surprising even me. "I never asked Dad for a single dollar." "I know," she said quickly, "but Corbin is very persuasive. People believe him." That sentence cracked something inside me. So simple, so devastating. People believe him, not me, never me. My grip on the envelope tightened until the paper bent beneath my fingers. Something in me sagged. My knees felt unsteady, and for a moment I had to fight the instinct to sit on the floor. "Mom," I whispered, "why didn't you defend me?" She blinked, her lips parting, but no explanation came. Just silence. And in that silence, I saw years of quiet compliance. Years of letting Corbin be the loud one, the confident one, the one the family relied on. And I saw myself, always trying to be the calm one, the one who didn't cause trouble, the one who stepped aside to keep peace. Tonight, the cost of that habit finally showed itself. She reached out, touching my cheek gently, a soft gesture meant to comfort me. Instead, it felt like defeat. I stepped back. Her expression fell. "Alden, please, for family harmony, maybe you should consider—" "No," I said, voice barely above a whisper. She froze, startled. But I wasn't finished. "You want me to step aside so the family can avoid conflict. But do you know what that means? It means letting them erase me. It means letting Corbin rewrite Dad, rewrite me." She didn't respond. She didn't have to. The fear in her eyes told me she knew I was right, but she was too lost in her own worries to act on it. I walked past her, my boots sinking softly into the carpet as I headed toward the far end of the landing. I could hear faint echoes from downstairs, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of relatives pretending tonight wasn't twisted. The envelope felt unbearably heavy in my coat. When I reached the window, I stopped. The estate grounds outside were dim, lit only by the yard lights my father insisted stay on every night. The sight blurred as tears filled my eyes, not from one emotion, but all of them layered together. Grief, betrayal, exhaustion, and the terrifying sense that I was losing every part of myself at once. I let the tears fall. I didn't try to stop them. Everything in me felt broken. This was the moment when all direction, all certainty, simply dissolved. The point where grief and betrayal met and swallowed the ground beneath me. But even in that collapse, Something small remained, a spark I couldn't name yet. As I wiped my face, the envelope slipped slightly in my hand. I caught it, staring at my name again, my father's handwriting, a reminder that not everyone's voice in this house had been stolen. Maybe Dad hadn't given up on me. Maybe I wasn't as lost as they needed me to believe. I straightened slowly, breathing in through my nose, trying to gather what little strength remained. Just as I steadied myself, footsteps approached from behind, heavy, deliberate. Then Corbin's voice echoed across the landing, calling my name. When I turned around, he was already smiling, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. Corbin stood just a few feet away, arms folded casually, leaning slightly to one side like a man watching a predictable play unfold. His expression wasn't smug. It was worse. It was calm, relaxed. Like none of this mattered to him because in his mind, it was already over. He tilted his head when he saw my face, and I could tell he noticed the tears I hadn't quite finished wiping away. "Tough night?" he asked, his tone light, almost playful. I didn't respond. He stepped closer, slow and deliberate, glancing down the hall as if ensuring no one else was around. "I'm glad I found you," he said. "Tonight's important for the family." That word, family, landed like a slap. He spoke it like he owned it, like it had nothing to do with me, just a brand he'd claimed for himself. "You look like you've had some time to reflect," he continued. "Tell me, have you finally accepted reality?" I stayed silent, not because I didn't have words, but because I didn't trust what might come out if I opened my mouth. He moved slowly, circling me just enough to make it uncomfortable, like I was being sized up. "Dad used to worry about you, you know. Said you always felt too much. Thought too long. There's no place for that kind of softness when legacy's on the line." I snapped my gaze toward him. "He never said that." He smiled, thin, knowing. "Maybe. But lies become truth when enough people prefer them." That line knocked the wind out of me more than I expected. He didn't even blink when he said it. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone, swiping across the screen with a few flicks of his thumb. Then he held it out toward me. "Here," he said, "just so there's no confusion about how the rest of the family sees you." On the screen were message threads, my name, my father's name, screenshots of what looked like text exchanges, me begging for money, saying I was in over my head, promising to pay him back. I felt the ground shift beneath me. "These are fake," I whispered. He shrugged. "Are they?" "They are. You're welcome to try explaining that to Aunt Elise, or Henry, or Uncle Tom, but I'd pick carefully. Most of them already saw this last week." I stared at the screen. The phrasing, the timestamps, it was all doctored, but it was just close enough to truth to make it believable. He had copied my tone, even lifted phrases I'd used in old birthday messages or check-ins. This wasn't carelessness. It was warfare. "You showed this to them?" I asked, voice hoarse. "I had to," he said, slipping the phone back into his pocket. "They deserve transparency. After all, it's not just about us anymore. It's about preserving Dad's name. The Brackett name." Something inside me burned, sharp and hot. "You think this protects him?" "No," Corbin said, stepping in closer, his voice dropping. "I think it protects me." The hallway felt tighter. My chest did too. "And just so we're clear," he continued, his eyes gleaming, "we had a little informal family conversation earlier. Consensus is I'm the best person to speak for the Brackett legacy. Even Mom agrees." That last sentence hit deeper than it should have. She told me to step aside. For family harmony, I muttered. She's smart, Corbin said, like it was the most reasonable conclusion in the world. You should listen to her. He paused, then gave me the final blow with a smile. Step aside quietly, Alden, or you're just going to embarrass yourself further. I finally looked at him, really looked, and for the first time all night, I didn't blink. Tell me something, I said, if you're so confident. Why go this far? Why fake messages, poison the well, twist Dad's words? Why does it take this much effort to beat someone you call weak? His smile didn't move, but something in his eyes did. Just for a second. A flicker. Doubt. No answer? I asked, taking a step forward. Maybe it's because the only way you feel powerful is by making sure no one else is standing when you walk into the room. That flicker grew. He didn't like that. He stepped in again, his voice tighter. Because you're weak, and weak men lose everything. I froze, those words. I'd heard them before. From Marla. Exactly. They'd rehearsed this, planned it, scripted my downfall together like a show they'd perform until I either broke or walked away. And that's when it finally clicked. They didn't want to defeat me. They wanted me gone before the will reading. That was the plan all along. Humiliate me, exhaust me, crush me until I packed up and left on my own. The envelope in my pocket pressed against my side like a weight, and I realized what my father had been trying to prepare me for, not inheritance, not title, but war. Corbin pulled back, smoothing his sleeves as if the conversation bored him now. Get some rest, he said with a grin. You'll need it for tomorrow. It's going to be historic. And just like that, he turned and walked away, humming a tune under his breath. It took me a moment to recognize it. Dad's favorite melody, another theft. I stood alone on the landing. The silence swallowed the echoes of his footsteps. My hands trembled, not from fear, from fury. And beneath it, something clearer than rage, sharper than grief, not hope, focus. As Corbin disappeared around the corner, I finally slid a finger under the seal of my father's envelope. I turned away from the hallway and stepped quietly into one of the guest bedrooms at the far end of the hall. One of the quieter ones that barely saw use. The door shut with a soft click behind me. Rain tapped the window in a slow, steady rhythm. The lamp by the bed cast a soft amber glow that felt far too gentle for what I was holding. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the envelope trembling in my hands. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. And then I unfolded it. The moment my father's handwriting came into view, everything around me seemed to stop. It was unmistakably his. Firm strokes, no wasted motion. He only wrote letters when something mattered more than he could say out loud. And that alone told me this wasn't just a note. This was the truth. He had never spoken. My son, it began. If you're reading this, then something I feared has come to pass. I'm sorry I didn't tell you these things while I was still alive. I should have, but I worried about timing, about making things worse, about whether you were ready. The words hit harder than I expected. He continued, You were the conscience of this family. That made you vulnerable, not weak, but exposed. That's why they targeted you. That's why I held things back. Not because I didn't believe in you, but because I feared what Corbin might do with the truth. I exhaled slowly, my chest tightening. My fingers gripped the edge of the paper like it might slip away. Dad laid it all out. He had watched Corbin quietly steal credit for work that wasn't his. Family projects, community decisions, even legal filings. He described how Corbin manipulated our cousins, turning them cold against me, subtle dig by subtle dig. There were meetings I was never told about, discussions I was excluded from. And behind the scenes, Corbin had tried, more than once, to have Dad strip me from any financial authority. I saw what he was becoming, Dad wrote, and I hoped it was just youth. That he'd mature, that he'd stop seeing you as competition. But I was wrong. Then came the twist that nearly knocked the air out of me. 2 years ago, Corbin had forged Dad's signature on a property authorization, nothing massive, but enough to get his foot in a dangerous door. Dad had caught it, quietly, kept the evidence, photocopies, originals, even a forensic note from a handwriting analyst. If you're facing this letter because Corbin has made a move against you, Dad wrote, then he's gone further than I feared. I've stored everything you'll need in a lockbox, the one only you know about. Use it when you must. Use it wisely. Use it with truth, not with vengeance. The room grew quieter somehow. I looked up. The lamplight felt dimmer, the rain outside louder, but inside me, something shifted. I kept reading. Dad turned to Marla next. He had seen through her. Years ago. There's a way she looks at you, Alden, he wrote. Or more precisely, doesn't. I don't believe she ever loved you the way you deserved. I think she loved the version of you that gave her a life she wanted. And that's not your fault. That line unspooled a knot in my chest I hadn't realized was still there. All this time, I'd blamed myself for not being enough, not being sharper, not reading the signs. But maybe I hadn't missed the signs. Maybe I'd just ignored them, hoping they would change. Then came the final section. I knew my time was running out, Dad wrote. That's why I moved fast. I've worked with counsel to ensure the business and estate pass to you, cleanly, legally, without loopholes. You are the steward of what I built, not Corbin. He isn't ready. He may never be. I stared at the words for a long while. Then slowly, I placed the letter down across my lap and leaned back against the headboard. The room felt cavernous. Outside, the rain picked up, still soft, but steady, like a heartbeat in the dark. My thoughts moved slowly, but for the first time, not aimlessly. The weight of betrayal, of humiliation, of loss, it was all still there. But something else had joined it. Something stronger than rage, sharper than grief, clarity, direction. Dad hadn't just written me a letter. He'd left me a compass. I wasn't going anywhere tonight. Let Corbin think he'd won this round. Let Marla believe she'd buried me in shame. I would be there tomorrow morning. I would sit through the reading of that will without a word. And I would let their arrogance carry them to the edge. Because now, I had the truth. I folded the letter carefully, almost reverently, and slipped it back into the envelope. It didn't feel like paper anymore. It felt like armor. I stood, and something inside me clicked. Quiet, certain, final. I wasn't the brother who let things slide anymore. I walked toward the door and opened it. The hallway beyond was dimly lit. Empty, or so I thought. As I stepped into the hall, a shadow at the far end moved, slowly, deliberately. Someone had been standing there, watching, listening. I followed the sound of soft footsteps just as the hallway light flicked on. At the far end stood my mother. Her hands clutched the edges of her robe, eyes wide with something that wasn't just surprise. She looked as though she'd been hit by a wave of emotion she wasn't prepared to face. "I heard everything," she whispered. "Your father's letter. All of it." Her voice barely carried across the corridor, yet every word landed squarely in my chest. I didn't move. I just watched her, unsure if I should feel exposed or relieved. She turned and slowly walked toward the small sitting room tucked between the guest wings, a space we rarely used. I followed silently. Inside, she sat on the edge of the settee, the lamp behind her flickering with the wind brushing the windows. Rain tapped steadily outside. Her hands trembled in her lap. "I should have said something sooner," she began. I knew Corbin was clever, manipulative even, but I never imagined the depth of it. Her voice cracked. "I thought your father had it under control. I thought he saw it all." She paused, looking down. "And I believed he did, until I watched you tonight. Heard your pain. That letter." She looked at me now, her eyes filled with regret. "That letter changed everything." I stayed quiet, let her speak. For once, I didn't want to fill in the silence for her. She continued, slowly, carefully, as if every word weighed something. "Corbin told me years ago that you didn't want the business, that you felt overwhelmed, that you were happy with a quieter life, without responsibility. I thought I was helping you by not pushing. I didn't realize he was carving out space for himself." She covered her mouth, took a shaky breath, and added, "I see it now. He wasn't protecting me from your stress. He was protecting himself from your potential." I swallowed hard. It wasn't just the betrayal that stung. It was how easily he'd gotten to her, how successfully he had stolen years of belief I never received. "I didn't speak up," she whispered, "because I assumed your father knew everything. I thought we were on the same page." She shook her head, tears welling. "We weren't." For the first time in a long while, she reached for my hand. "Your father trusted you. Don't let Corbin take anything more from you." I looked down at our hands. Hers were smaller now, softer, but the guilt was heavy between us. And though I wanted to pull away, I didn't. The next morning came heavy with silence. The rain had stopped, but clouds still lingered in the low Carolina sky. I dressed in the suit my father had tailored for me 3 years ago. He'd said, "You'll know when it's time." Today was that time. Downstairs, the air was thick with unspoken tension. Marla and Corbin stood near the door, whispering, her arms folded tightly, his expression smug. They didn't acknowledge me. That suited me just fine. The ride to the law office was quiet, each of us in separate cars. The firm, Walden and Pierce, stood like a fortress downtown, dark walnut paneling, frosted glass, the kind of place where power lived behind closed doors. A receptionist checked our names and nodded to security, who guided us into a room lined with books, framed documents, and a single steel box sealed with my father's initials. Corbin smirked at me as I sat across from him. Marla didn't meet my eyes. Attorney Pierce stood at the head of the table, his presence calm, measured. He placed a key into the sealed box, twisted it gently, and opened the lid with deliberate care. Inside, a series of manila folders, a small black flash drive, a second envelope. "This letter," he said, holding up the envelope, "was to be read only after Richard Carter's death, and in the presence of both sons." Corbin shifted. Pierce began. "The will was simple, brutally so. Every major asset, ownership of the company, the investment portfolio, family estate, and all executive decision rights passed to me. Corbin's name was mentioned once. He was to receive a vintage watch collection and a first edition of Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea. Marla wasn't named at all. The silence in the room stretched thin, then snapped. "You've got to be kidding me." Corbin exploded, standing abruptly. "This is a setup. You manipulated him, fed him lies while he was dying." Pierce remained calm. "Mr. Brackett anticipated your reaction. He inserted the flash drive into the conference monitor. The screen blinked to life, and there was Dad. Clear eyes, firm voice. He looked right into the camera. If Corbin is reacting as I expect, then you finally understand why I made my decision." Corbin froze, Marla's face drained of color. Dad continued. "I spent the last 3 years documenting everything. Your power plays, your fabrications, and the people you used. I hoped it would stop. It didn't. The room was still, like no one dared breathe. I left behind one final instruction," he said, "and this one is for the brother who betrayed you." The screen paused on his face, frozen mid-breath, as if even the camera understood the weight of what was coming next. No one moved, not a chair, not a hand. Even the air in the room seemed to tighten around us. Then Dad's voice returned, colder, sharper than I had ever heard it while he was alive. "Corbin," he said, "if you are hearing this, it means the truth can no longer be softened." A few people flinched. Even Attorney Pierce straightened his stance, bracing himself. Dad continued, his tone steady, almost too calm. "I gave you every opportunity, every kindness, every chance to outgrow the jealousy you carried since childhood. Instead, you nurtured it." He spoke without raising his voice, and that somehow made each word cut deeper. "You forged my signature. You took credit for work that wasn't yours. You manipulated family members to isolate your brother. You attempted to divert funds. You shaped lies until people believed them." Across the table, Corbin's jaw tightened. His hands clenched the armrests. Marla's breathing grew sharp, uneasy. "And all of it," Dad said, "was your choice." The intensity in the room rose like a storm gathering speed. Every eye was on the screen, but you could feel their attention leaning toward me, waiting, measuring how I absorbed every truth I had long suspected but never been able to prove. Then Attorney Pierce opened a thick folder from the sealed box. "This," he said, tapping the documents, "is the private audit your father commissioned." He slid the first page toward us. It listed transactions, circled, annotated, compared with signatures. Marla whispered, "Oh my, oh no," before covering her mouth. Corbin's face drained of color. "These documents," Pierce continued, "confirm that funds were siphoned from a subsidiary 2 years ago. The authorization signature was forged." Corbin sank back in his chair. His confidence, his armor, crumbled in seconds. Dad's recorded voice resumed. "If you attempt to challenge my will, these documents will be sent to the authorities immediately." Marla's eyes widened. She knew the implications, perhaps faster than he did. "No legal challenge," Dad repeated firmly. "Not one." You could almost see the moment it hit him. Corbin's breath stuttered. His jaw trembled. His foot tapped the floor in restless, panicked bursts. For the first time in years, the mask he wore, the flawless, confident air, broke apart piece by piece. Then Dad's tone shifted as the screen displayed a separate letter. "And now," he said, "a message for Alden." My name echoed through the room, low and steady. My chest tightened. Dad continued, "Months before your wedding, Marla met privately with your brother. I hired a private investigator when the pattern repeated. What I found troubled me deeply." The attorney laid out photographs on the table, grainy snapshots, time-stamped logs, messages, each piece a thread in a web I once refused to see. Marla shook her head frantically. This is taken out of context. This is, Pierce interrupted gently. Mrs. Brackett, these files include signed statements from third parties. The context is very clear. Her denial dissolved into silence. Her hands trembled at her sides, not from shame, but from fear. Fear of losing the life she'd calculated, not the husband she'd betrayed. Corbin stared at the table, shoulders slumped, breathing uneven. For a moment, he looked less like my brother and more like a man who saw the walls closing in from every direction. The room felt like another funeral, but this time it was the burial of their schemes, their manipulations, their years of illusions. Dad's voice softened in the video. Alden, do not destroy your brother, even if he tries to destroy you. Show him the truth. Make him face what he became. He paused, as if choosing the next words with care. You deserved better than the love they gave you. My throat tightened, not from grief alone, but from something deeper, something healing and hurting all at once. Then the screen went dark. Silence followed, heavy, thick, until Corbin suddenly erupted, not with physical violence, but with words hurled like stones. You did this, he shouted at me. You turned him against me. You poisoned him with your quiet, your pity, your fake innocence. His voice cracked. His fury collapsed inward, too thin to stand upright anymore. But the room didn't join him. Not this time. Everyone saw the truth now. His accusations died mid-sentence. He staggered back, elbow hitting the chair behind him. He caught himself, barely, then shoved his way toward the exit, breathing hard, nearly tripping on the rug before storming out. Marla followed a second later, not to comfort him, but to chase the remaining scraps of her collapsing future. I exhaled slowly, not in triumph, not in victory, just release. The attorney broke the quiet. We'll proceed with the final signature. My hand didn't shake as I signed. Dad's pen felt warm, solid, familiar, as if he had placed it there himself. The weight that settled on my shoulders wasn't heavy like before. It wasn't burden. It was ownership. The kind that comes from truth, finally rising after being buried for too long. When everything was complete, I stepped out into the cool afternoon air. The clouds had begun to part. Not sunlight, just clarity. Returning home later, I walked straight to Dad's old desk. I took out the first letter he'd written to me, the one with the faint coffee stain I'd noticed on that awful morning. The memory echoed through me, full circle, quiet, honest. I folded the letter gently, placed it in the drawer where Dad kept things he valued most, and whispered, I'll take it from here.